Somewhere at the absolute edge of the known European continent, where the tectonic plates of Europe and Asia forcefully collide, a towering wall of stone violently pierces the sky. These are the formidable peaks of the Caucasus Mountains, a jagged spine of rock that has stood as a silent, unyielding sentinel for millennia. To the west, the restless and gentle waves of the Black Sea crash against a coastline draped in thick, humid air. This narrow corridor of land, physically trapped between snow-capped giants and the dark ocean, holds a profound antiquity that few places on Earth can still claim to possess. This is Sakartvelo, a land deeply known to the outside world simply as Georgia. It is a country heavily etched into a dramatic and unforgiving landscape of soaring mountains, fertile valleys, and ancient sun-drenched plains that stretch endlessly towards the distant horizon. For countless generations, this rugged and challenging terrain has not merely served as a passive backdrop for human existence, it has physically and psychologically shaped the history of an entire nation and molded the very soul of the people who fiercely cling to its steep slopes. You can physically feel the heavy weight of time in the frigid wind that sweeps relentlessly down from the highest glaciers. It is a profound place where the lingering echoes of ancient and powerful empires have left their indelible marks upon the freezing soil. The Persian, Ottoman, and Russian empires all marched their massive armies across these isolated valleys, continuously seeking conquest and total dominion over the land. Yet, the mountains and its people simply absorbed these monumental collisions of human history without breaking. They deliberately took the fragmented remnants of invading cultures and slowly transformed them into something fiercely and uniquely their own. This complicated and bloody history is not merely a dusty relic confined to the forgotten pages of closed books. It is an inescapable living presence, physically felt in the crumbling, weather-beaten stones of ancient fortresses that still watch silently over the perilous mountain passes. It deeply resides in the unyielding, almost defiant spirit of the local inhabitants who refuse to be erased by the relentless passage of time. When observed from the frigid air high above, Georgia slowly reveals itself as a massive, complex tapestry of intense, vibrant greens and deep, earthy browns. The towering mountains are not merely a scenic backdrop for the local villagers. They are the country's physical spine, its impenetrable fortress, and its ultimate sanctuary against the chaos of the outside world. For centuries, they have successfully protected a completely unique culture, a fiercely distinct language, and an ancient Christian faith against the violent tides of empires that have continuously risen and fallen around it. These massive peaks, which explicitly include some of the highest elevations in all of Europe, have naturally created a complex mosaic of distinct microclimates and completely isolated valleys. Within these hidden geographical pockets, completely distinct regional dialects and ancient traditions have flourished untouched for many centuries. To the far west, the harsh land gradually softens as it slopes downward towards the rhythmic shores of the Black Sea. Its highly humid and subtropical climate actively fosters a dense, overwhelming lushness, characterized by thick bamboo groves and sprawling citrus orchards that scent the heavy air. Conversely, to the far east, the vibrant landscape slowly dries into cracked, semi-arid plains under the baking sun. This stark geographical contrast stands as a profound testament to the country's remarkable and extreme environmental diversity. But to look closer, past the immense scale of the geography, is to see a resilient nation that is not defined by its geographical isolation. It is defined by a deep and unbreakable spirit of human connection to its ancient faith, to its rocky land, and, most importantly, to one another. This is a raw story of a challenging life lived with immense passion, with fierce pride, and with a deep, quiet appreciation for the simple, enduring rhythms of family, food, and local community. This is the true story of daily survival and living in Georgia. Life in this mountainous country is heavily governed by a steady rhythm that feels both incredibly ancient and refreshingly unhurried by modern standards. The local atmosphere is a completely unique blend of relaxed Mediterranean warmth and a distinctly hardened Caucasian spirit of survival and resilience. In the sprawling, historic capital city of Tbilisi, daily life unfolds most authentically within the city's famous hidden courtyards. These are deeply communal shared spaces that essentially function as massive outdoor living rooms for the entire neighborhood. Here, the intensely private lives of individual families naturally spill out into the wider community without hesitation. These ancient courtyards, often completely hidden behind unassuming, crumbling street facades, are entirely self-contained worlds unto themselves. Thick, heavy grapevines slowly climb the aging brick walls, seeking the sunlight. Tangled laundry lines crisscross the open-air space above, gently swaying in the afternoon breeze. The atmosphere is heavily saturated with a constant symphony of familiar domestic sounds. Here, the rich, bitter scent of freshly brewed black coffee perfectly mixes with the loud sound of neighbors chatting openly from their wooden balconies. The innocent laughter of children playing on the cracked pavement echoes off the surrounding walls. Even in the middle of this bustling, modernizing capital, there is a pervasive, almost overwhelming sense of intimacy. It maintains a distinct village-like feel where the concept of community is not an abstract, modern idea. It is a daily, heavily lived reality that dictates the flow of human interaction. The native Georgian people, proudly known in their own tongue as the Kartvelebi, are widely known for their immense, overwhelming warmth. They possess a highly expressive nature and a deep, completely unwavering pride in their ancient, complex heritage. Everyday life here is lived with an undeniable emotional intensity. Pure joy is loudly celebrated with absolute gusto, and heavy sorrow is shared quietly with profound, collective empathy. Daily conversations are highly animated, constantly filled with large hand gestures and a blunt directness. This speaks volumes to an ancient culture that highly values absolute sincerity above polite pleasantries. The daily pace of human life is remarkably deliberate and intentionally slow. Formal business meetings might begin with a long, completely unhurried conversation deeply examining the health and status of one's extended family. A simple, routine trip to the local neighborhood market can easily turn into an hour of tasting fresh produce, talking loudly, and eagerly catching up on local community news. This is a resilient society that intentionally prioritizes genuine human connection over the relentless, stressful ticking of the modern clock. It is a rare place where passing time is measured not in precise minutes, but in meaningful, shared moments. Daily life across the sprawling cities and the smallest, most isolated mountain villages of Georgia is deeply rooted in the foundational concept of interdependence. As the heavy darkness of the Caucasian night slowly recedes, the day often begins with incredibly simple, time-honored routines dictated by the turning of the earth. In the remote countryside, the absolute silence is first broken by the sharp, metallic clanking of a solitary cowbell echoing through the thick morning mist. The very first weak rays of sunlight physically touch the frost-covered leaves of the ancient vineyards. This initiates the daily process of photosynthesis and slowly warms the damp, fertile soil. For a vast majority of the local population, the critical first destination of the morning is the local open-air market, simply known as the bazaar. These sprawling, chaotic commercial hubs are not merely zones designed for the simple transaction of buying basic food. They are the vibrant, beating heart of the community, an essential social nervous system where the survival and cohesion of the neighborhood are actively maintained. The cold morning air here is incredibly thick and heavy, with a complex, overwhelming olfactory mixture. The sharp, volatile natural oils of fresh cilantro, peppery tarragon, and sweet purple basil aggressively mingle. They clash directly with the harsh, acidic aroma of fermented and pickled vegetables stored in massive, brine-soaked wooden barrels. Beneath this complex layer there is the fundamental, grounding scent of raw earth, still heavily dusted on the rough skins of freshly unearthed potatoes. Here, amidst towering, precarious pyramids of overripe red tomatoes and massive, dripping wheels of salty Solguni cheese, human connections are forged. The fragile fabric of local friendships is actively repaired and continuously maintained through daily interaction. Essential community gossip and vital survival information are quietly exchanged over splintered wooden crates. This allows the collective, living pulse of the society to be accurately measured and understood by its inhabitants. The loud act of haggling over a few copper tetri coins is not seen as an aggressive, hostile confrontation. It is an expected verbal dance, a highly ritualized, friendly social interaction. It is an essential form of daily communication that holds as much psychological weight as the actual business transaction taking place. Even within the dense concrete apartment blocks of the larger, modernizing cities, daily existence is strictly defined by the immediate neighborhood. The psychological and practical bonds between adjacent neighbors are exceptionally strong and incredibly durable. They have been slowly forged over decades of shared historical trauma, severe economic hardship, and mutual emotional support during times of crisis. The physical architecture of these tightly packed shared spaces naturally forces a physical proximity that strictly demands social cooperation. It is an entirely common, everyday occurrence for an upstairs neighbor to drop by completely unannounced. They will often carry a steaming heavy plate of freshly baked khachapuri to share. This iconic, calorie-dense bread, heavily stuffed with melting, bubbling local cheese, is vastly more than just basic biological sustenance. It is a physical, edible manifestation of care, a necessary transfer of thermal warmth and energy in a challenging environment. It is equally common for an entire concrete building block to spontaneously mobilize its collective resources. They will physically and financially assist a single family in a sudden moment of medical or economic crisis. This deeply ingrained culture of mutual interdependence is perhaps most powerfully and visibly expressed in the ancient tradition of extreme Georgian hospitality. In this complex and historically dangerous terrain, hospitality is absolutely not merely a polite social custom or a superficial pleasantry. It is treated as an absolute sacred duty, an unyielding foundational cornerstone of the national psychological identity. An ancient, widely repeated Georgian proverb explicitly and literally declares that a guest is a direct, physical gift from God. Weary travelers and foreign visitors are instantly welcomed with a fierce, open-hearted generosity. It is a level of extreme giving that is both deeply humbling and intensely overwhelming to witness. To be formally invited across the threshold into a traditional Georgian home is to be immediately elevated in status. You are treated not as a passing stranger, but as a highly cherished, permanent member of the familial bloodline. You will be forcefully seated at the absolute head of the heavy wooden dining table. The host will continuously offer the very best, most calorie-rich food and aged drink that the struggling household has managed to acquire. The local host will feel a profound, genuine sense of personal honor in your physical presence. Absolutely no financial expense or physical effort will be spared to guarantee your immediate physical comfort and sustained happiness. This hospitality is fiercely maintained even if it leaves their own winter larder severely depleted. The multi-generational family unit remains the absolute, unshakable bedrock of modern Georgian society. The biological and emotional bonds between consecutive living generations are exceptionally strong. They are driven by both severe economic necessity and deep, inescapable cultural conditioning. Grandparents, parents, and young children very frequently inhabit the exact same physical living space. Alternatively, they remain in extreme geographical proximity within the exact same mountain village. The elderly population in this region is treated with an immense, almost reverent level of daily respect. Their accumulated decades of practical wisdom, historical memory, and direct experience in surviving economic collapse are highly valued. They are actively utilized as a critical, irreplaceable national resource for ongoing survival. The grandparents, affectionately and formally known in the Kartveli language as the Bebia and Babua, play an incredibly central role. They are deeply active in the daily physical rearing and psychological molding of the youngest children. They act as the primary biological mechanism for passing down oral histories, complex culinary survival recipes, and rigid cultural values. Massive, extended family gatherings are highly frequent, incredibly loud, and intensely joyous occasions. They are entirely centered around a massive, shared communal meal that can easily last for many consecutive hours. These chaotic gatherings serve as the essential social glue that actively holds the wider society together against external modern pressures. It is a dedicated, protected time for aggressively reinforcing blood bonds and loudly recounting ancestral stories. It is the critical mechanism for physically passing down ancient traditions from one fading generation to the next, newly rising one. They are the specific, repeated moments in time when the collective, historical memory of the family unit is forcefully renewed. It is loudly celebrated against the vast, silent, and indifferent backdrop of the towering Caucasus Mountains. This fierce dedication to ancestral tradition in Georgia is not a passive, static museum exhibit. It is a powerful, dynamic, and living force that heavily permeates every single microscopic aspect of daily life. It acts as the heavy iron anchor that gives this small, vulnerable nation its completely unique identity. It provides a fundamentally unshakable foundation in a rapidly globalizing and shifting world. At the very physiological heart of this fierce national identity is the native Georgian language itself, known locally as Kartveli. Linguistically, it is an absolute global anomaly. It is a highly complex, deeply guttural language with absolutely no known, direct linguistic relatives anywhere else on the face of the earth. Its entirely unique and visually beautiful curving script physically dates back in the archaeological record to at least the 5th century. This specific alphabet, with its elegant, looping and almost fluid letters carved into ancient stone, is a massive source of collective pride. It stands as a highly visible daily symbol of Georgia's completely distinct, stubborn, cultural path through history. To stand in a crowded Tbilisi street and hear the Kartveli language spoken aloud is to hear a direct, acoustic echo. It is the unbroken sound of millennia of human survival in an isolated mountain corridor. It is a specific sequence of sounds that is simultaneously highly poetic, deeply guttural, and undeniably strong. It perfectly and violently reflects the very rugged landscape from which it was originally born. The unique Georgian alphabet is not the only ancient anchor holding this society steady against the violent currents of history. At the absolute, fundamental spiritual heart of the nation beats the enduring pulse of the Georgian Orthodox Church. This mountainous territory was one of the very first regions on the entire planet to formally adopt Christianity as an official state religion. This monumental ideological shift occurred in the early years of the 4th century. The faith has been a completely inseparable, deeply ingrained part of the national consciousness and psychological survival strategy ever since. The foundational historical narrative centers on Saint Nino, a young woman originating from the distant region of Cappadocia. Historical accounts state she walked across the brutal Caucasus terrain holding a simple cross forged from dried grapevines and bound tightly with her own hair. This specific biological connection between the sacred faith and the vital agricultural crop of the vine perfectly encapsulates the Georgian worldview. For over 16 turbulent centuries, this specific brand of orthodoxy has served as an incredibly powerful unifying force. It provided a necessary psychological sanctuary and a physical refuge through endless, brutal centuries of foreign invasion, political upheaval, and economic collapse. The physical landscape of Georgia is heavily dotted with ancient, weather-beaten churches and massive stone monasteries. These heavy stone structures are intentionally perched in the most geographically dramatic, highly inaccessible and strategically defensible locations imaginable. The iconic Gergeti Trinity Church perfectly exemplifies this architectural defiance. It stands completely isolated at an elevation of 2,200 meters, directly under the massive, freezing shadow of the towering Mount Kazbek. Building this heavy stone structure in the 14th century required an astonishing expenditure of human caloric energy and physical labor. Massive blocks of volcanic rock had to be dragged manually up near vertical inclines through freezing mud and biting winds. Today, the freezing air at this extreme altitude is critically thin, severely taxing the lungs of anyone who ascends the steep mountain path to reach the heavy wooden doors. Further south, the absolute extreme of human architectural adaptation is visible at the sprawling cave monastery of Vardzia. Here, human beings literally carved a massive, multi-level city directly into the sheer, vertical face of a solid stone cliff. They excavated thousands of tons of rock using primitive hand tools to create hidden chambers, deep wells, and a central church to physically hide from invading Mongol armies. These ancient structures are absolutely not just dead historical monuments or empty tourist attractions. They remain highly active, deeply serious places of daily worship. They act as vital, functioning centers of local community life and stand as incredibly powerful, visible symbols of a religious faith that has stubbornly endured every historical attempt to eradicate it. Inside these thick, freezing stone walls, the heavy, damp air is permanently saturated with the thick, acrid smoke of burning beeswax candles and sweet frankincense. The acoustic environment inside these ancient, vaulted stone chambers is specifically designed by their ancient architects to artificially amplify the human voice. This leads directly to another foundational pillar of Georgian survival and cultural identity, which is the ancient practice of Georgian polyphonic singing. This highly complex musical tradition is officially recognized by UNESCO as a priceless, intangible cultural treasure of humanity. It is considered by many acoustic historians and sociologists to be the literal, audible voice of the nation's collective soul. Crucially, these complex, deeply haunting harmonic structures are sung entirely a cappella, completely without the aid of any external musical instruments. The human body itself, the vibrating chest cavity, and the strained vocal cords are utilized as the sole physical resonance chambers. Different, isolated geographical regions have naturally evolved their own completely distinct, highly complex acoustic styles based on their specific physical environments. In the western region of Guria, the polyphony is incredibly complex and mathematically intricate. It features fast, overlapping, and chaotic vocal lines that directly mimic the dense, abundant nature of the surrounding subtropical environment. This stands in stark, deliberate contrast to the austere, deeply resonant and heavy-bass drone found in the eastern Kakheti region. The Kakhetian style directly reflects the vast, open, and often sun-baked semi-arid plains of the Eastern Territory. Each regional acoustic style serves as a completely unique, audible expression of the local biological and psychological character. However, the absolute zenith of Georgian cultural expression, where food, wine, history, and rigid social hierarchy perfectly intersect, is the legendary Georgian feast, formerly known as the Supra. To external observers, a traditional Supra might initially appear to be simply a massive, chaotic meal of excess. In sociological reality, it is a highly structured, heavily codified, and deeply meaningful ritual that is absolutely essential for societal cohesion. It serves as a formal, organized celebration of biological life, community survival, and shared cultural memory in a historically dangerous land. At the absolute, uncontested head of every single authentic Supra sits the Tamada, or the Supreme Toastmaster. This is a figure of immense, unchallengeable social importance and heavy psychological responsibility. The Tamada is meticulously chosen by the gathered community for their exceptional verbal eloquence, quick wit, and deep historical wisdom. They are given the absolute, dictatorial authority to lead the entire gathered feast through a strict, unbroken series of highly ritualized toasts. The sequence of these specific toasts is rigid, predictable, and deeply symbolic. They must systematically and loudly toast to God, to the nation of Georgia, to the desperate necessity of continued peace, to the living family, to the deceased ancestors whose bones lie in the earth, and finally to the guests present at the heavy wooden table. Each individual toast delivered by the Tamada is not a brief, casual exclamation. It is a carefully constructed miniature speech, a deep philosophical reflection, or a heartfelt historical story of past tragedies and victories. It actively sets the precise emotional and psychological tone for the entire length of the long table. The assembled guests are strictly forbidden by cultural law from drinking their wine randomly or out of turn. There is a specific, highly enforced chronological order and a deep, historical significance attached to every single raised glass. The chosen Tamada must possess the extreme physical stamina of a seasoned orator, the detailed memory of a local historian, the linguistic skill of a poet, and the deep insight of a philosopher, all combined into one human being. The traditional Supra functions as a powerful, unifying psychological experience for the entire community. It is a necessary, repetitive social ceremony that forcefully reinforces the absolute core survival values of Georgian society. It legally mandates extreme generosity, deep reciprocal friendship, and a profound, unbreakable reverence for the violent and beautiful past. It operates as a living, breathing academy of culture where the youngest, inexperienced generation directly observes and learns from the oldest, most battle-tested members. The critical, invisible bonds of the local community are physically and emotionally forged anew with every single glass of dark, heavy wine that is raised into the cold mountain air. The entire physiological, survival, and historical economic foundation of the Georgian nation have long been inextricably tied to the deep, fertile richness of its varied soil. In the expansive, undulating rural regions, daily human biological existence is entirely dictated by the harsh, unyielding agricultural calendar. The country functions as a massive, naturally enclosed biological garden. It produces a staggering wealth of dense calories through resilient crops, specifically focusing on durable fruits, subterranean vegetables, and highly caloric tree nuts. The indigenous walnut tree is a particularly essential, deeply integrated biological component of the national survival diet and local ecosystem. Its heavy, oil-rich yields are systematically harvested, dried, and preserved to provide critical fat and protein during the long, freezing winter months. Furthermore, this isolated terrain is currently one of the world's leading agricultural producers of resilient hazelnuts. Simultaneously, the highly humid subtropical zone hugging the western Black Sea coast provides the exact climatic conditions required for cultivating delicate, vitamin-rich citrus fruits. For countless centuries, the relentless physical rhythm of human life in the Georgian countryside has been strictly commanded by the seasonal turning of the earth. The intensive labor of spring planting, the anxious monitoring of the summer growing season, and the exhausting, frantic physical exertion of the autumn harvest completely dominate human activity. Nowhere is this profound, unbreakable biological connection to the rough land more visibly and historically evident than in Georgia's ancient, deeply revered tradition of indigenous winemaking. According to extensive global archaeological evidence and rigorous biochemical analysis of ancient clay fragments, this specific mountainous region is the literal, historical birthplace of human viticulture. The practice of cultivating wild grapes and fermenting their juice into alcohol here physically dates back an astonishing 8,000 continuous years. In this specific cultural context, wine is absolutely not considered a mere recreational beverage or a modern commercial commodity. It is a highly protected national treasure, an incredibly vital liquid component of their ancient religious rituals, and a profound source of collective psychological pride. The sprawling, sun-drenched eastern region of Kakheti functions as the undisputed agricultural heart of Georgian wine country. Its expansive landscape is a massive, meticulously engineered geometric patchwork of endless, neatly aligned vineyards stretching toward the distant Caucasus horizon. Here, the ancient, labor-intensive method of fermenting wine inside a cuvevri remains the dominant local practice. A cuvevri is a massive, incredibly heavy, egg-shaped clay vessel that is meticulously handcrafted from specific local mud and fired in massive kilns. Instead of being stored in modern temperature-controlled metal tanks above ground, these fragile clay giants are physically buried deep beneath the Earth's surface. This ancient subterranean storage method actively utilizes the Earth's natural, stable thermal mass to carefully regulate the volatile fermentation temperature without electricity. This specific traditional production technique is globally recognized by UNESCO for its historical significance and unique biochemical results. Crucially, it involves fermenting the crushed grapes entirely whole. The thick skins, the bitter seeds, and the woody stems are all completely included inside the sealed, buried clay vessels for several months. This prolonged, intense physical contact between the fermenting juice and the solid organic matter fundamentally alters the liquid's chemical composition. It forcefully imparts a completely unique, highly astringent chemical character, a surprisingly deep, rich amber color, and an incredibly heavy, complex tannic structure that preserves the wine for decades. The crucial annual grape harvest, locally and formally known as the Kartvelebi, is a period of extreme, synchronized physical labor. It rapidly transforms into a massive, joyous, communal celebration of biological survival. Extended families, urban friends, and entire village networks physically converge upon the endless rows of vines. They perform thousands of repetitive, exhausting manual cuts to sever the heavy grape clusters before the first killing frost descends from the high peaks. To truly comprehend the complex internal mechanics of Georgian society, one must intimately understand and physically consume its traditional food. The local cuisine is a direct, highly caloric, and delicious biological expression of the country's turbulent history and extreme geography. It is an incredibly generous, deeply flavorful, and physically satisfying survival diet originally designed to fuel heavy manual labor in freezing conditions. The absolute, unshakable caloric cornerstones of the daily Georgian table are baked wheat bread, fermented dairy cheese, and local wine. Freshly baked bread, simply known as puri, is an absolute, non-negotiable biological requirement at every single communal meal. It is exclusively baked inside a massive, superheated, traditional cylindrical clay oven, known locally as a tone. This specific thermal environment, fired by burning hardwood, gives the bread a completely unique, heavily blistered, crispy exterior crust and a dense, chewy interior structure. The daily, highly physical sight of a local baker skillfully and dangerously slapping the raw, sticky dough directly onto the searing hot, curved inner wall of the smoking tone is a ubiquitous feature of both urban and rural life. However, the single most iconic, globally recognized and calorie-dense Georgian culinary invention is arguably the khachapuri. This is a massive, heavy, warm bread heavily stuffed with vast quantities of melting, locally fermented Sulguni cheese. Its specific physical shape and precise chemical composition vary wildly from one isolated geographical region to another. The standard Imeretian version is a simple, flat, enclosed circular dough completely filled with pungent cheese. The more excessive Megrelian regional variation aggressively adds another thick, heavy layer of melting cheese directly onto the top crust, significantly increasing its fat content. Yet, the most famous and visually striking iteration originates from the coastal Ajara region situated on the humid Black Sea. The Ajarian khachapuri is meticulously shaped like an open wooden boat. The center of this edible vessel is entirely flooded with a bubbling molten pool of sharp cheese. Minutes before consumption, it is heavily topped with a raw, unbroken egg yolk and a massive, thick pat of unpasteurized local butter. The intense residual thermal heat of the bubbling cheese slowly cooks the raw egg as the diner vigorously stirs the rich fats together into a heavy emulsion. Another highly revered, structurally complex national dish is the khinkali. These are massive, heavy, savory dough dumplings typically filled to the point of bursting with raw, heavily spiced minced meat, animal fat, and fresh mountain herbs. The specific physical act of successfully eating a khinkali is considered a precise, highly scrutinized local art form. They are strictly meant to be eaten entirely by hand, completely rejecting modern metallic cutlery. The diner must firmly grip the thick, twisted top knot of boiled dough which serves as a necessary, uneaten physical handle. They must then carefully, strategically bite a tiny puncture hole into the bottom of the sagging, heavy dumpling. This critical action allows the diner to forcefully slurp out the boiling, highly flavorful, fat-rich internal broth before consuming the dense meat and dough casing. Spilling even a single drop of this precious, calorie-dense liquid onto the plate is considered a severe technical failure and a massive waste of vital energy. Furthermore, the entire spectrum of Georgian cuisine is strictly characterized by its aggressive, liberal use of highly aromatic, fresh vegetation. Massive handfuls of raw cilantro, sharp tarragon, and sweet basil are consumed daily to provide critical vitamins and aid digestion. This green freshness is constantly counterbalanced by the heavy, rich, earthy flavor and dense caloric profile of locally harvested walnuts. These crushed walnuts are forcefully integrated into countless ancient survival dishes. They form the thick, heavy, savory base for the famous winter meat stew known as satsivi. They are pulverized into a fine paste to create the ubiquitous, highly pungent dipping sauce called bhaji. They are even meticulously threaded onto long cotton strings and repeatedly dipped into a boiling, thick reduction of concentrated grape juice. This specific chemical process creates the highly durable, candle-shaped winter survival ration known as church kala. This completely unique, highly adapted culinary tradition is not an accident of geography. It physically reflects a long, bloody history of ancient global trade, moving slowly along the perilous paths of the Silk Road. It carefully absorbed subtle, exotic chemical influences from the Persian Empire and the distant Mediterranean basin. It then combined all these foreign elements into a dense, heavily fortified culinary tradition that is entirely and fiercely Georgian. The natural world here is not merely a passive backdrop. It is an ever-present, physically dominating and incredibly powerful external force that actively dictates the parameters of human existence. The visual landscape offers a staggering, almost incomprehensible level of biological and geological diversity. It physically ranges from the eternal, blindingly white snows and deadly glaciers of the high Caucasus Range to the violently lush, humid, and dense subtropical coastline of the Black Sea. For the native Georgian population, these towering, jagged mountains represent vastly more than just a formidable geographical feature or a physical barrier to external trade. They are a profound, deep-seated psychological source of daily inspiration, an imposing symbol of national strength, and a highly protected sanctuary for spiritual and physical renewal. Historically revered Georgian writers and philosophers, most notably the legendary poet Vaja Pshavala, wrote extensively and passionately about the complex, often fatal relationship between fragile human beings and the indifferent, massive mountains. They successfully captured an ancient worldview that is permanently steeped in a deep, unavoidable respect for the lethal power of raw nature. During the brief, intense summer months, human movement shifts aggressively toward the higher elevations. Ancient dirt paths originally carved into the rock by desperate traders and heavily armed shepherds centuries ago are now cautiously navigated by modern inhabitants seeking the clean, dangerously thin air and the profound, absolute silence of the high peaks. In the incredibly remote, highly defensible and tower-filled villages of Svaneti, and across the dramatic, wind-scoured landscapes surrounding Kazbegi, the ancient, physically punishing life of the traditional shepherd continues almost exactly as it has for thousands of years. These men represent a figure of immense romantic and highly practical importance in the Georgian cultural survival narrative. They lead a brutally difficult life of extreme physical solitude, constantly exposed to lethal weather conditions and wild predators, maintaining a deep, unbroken biological connection to the rigid rhythms of nature. They actively practice a necessary, ancient form of seasonal agricultural migration, formerly known as transhumance. This involves physically driving their massive, bleating flocks of heavy-wooled sheep up to the high, freezing alpine pastures in the brief summer, and slowly, dangerously returning them to the sheltered, warmer valleys before the lethal winter snows barricade the high passes. It is an exhausting, dangerous biological cycle that is exactly as old as the shifting tectonic plates beneath their feet. Conversely, for a geographically isolated country trapped by such formidable mountainous terrain, Georgia is simultaneously a highly dynamic nation, constantly on the move. A complex, completely chaotic network of physical infrastructure continuously attempts to conquer the hostile geography. Some major arteries are highly modern, recently paved, and well maintained by heavy machinery. However, countless other crucial connecting routes remain incredibly rugged, unpaved, deeply rutted, and intensely challenging, dangerously connecting the modernizing cities to the most isolated, fading mountain villages. The absolute, undisputed workhorse of this national transportation system is the marshrutka. These are heavily modified, heavily utilized, and often aging shared minibuses that frantically ferry hundreds of thousands of people between distant towns and across terrifyingly high, unprotected mountain passes every single day. A physical journey inside a crowded marshrutka is an intense sociological experience in itself. It functions as a perfectly enclosed, high-speed microcosm of wider Georgian society. The cramped interior space is constantly filled with loud, overlapping conversation, the generous sharing of homemade, high-calorie snacks among complete strangers, and the terrifying, breathtaking views of the sheer drops outside the scratched windows. The veteran drivers of these heavily burdened vehicles are undisputed masters of their incredibly dangerous, physically demanding routes. They casually navigate incredibly sharp, hairpin turns on loose gravel with a practiced, almost terrifying ease, constantly smoking and talking while holding the lives of 20 people in their calloused hands. Simultaneously, beneath the cracking asphalt of the capital city of Tbilisi, a completely different, highly efficient mechanical system operates in the dark. A deep, echoing and highly reliable underground metro system, a massive, heavy concrete and steel legacy left behind by the collapsed Soviet era, seamlessly moves hundreds of thousands of urban citizens beneath the congested city streets each day. This rapid, Mechanical modernization forcefully exists alongside and constantly rubs against a deep-seated, incredibly ancient traditional culture. It is the absolute defining central paradox of modern Georgian biological and social existence. In a completely remote, isolated mountain village where daily physical life strictly follows ancient agricultural and religious patterns, it is now not entirely uncommon to find a centuries-old stone guest house fully equipped with a high-speed fiber optic internet connection. The younger, highly educated generation currently residing in Tbilisi is just as technologically connected to rapidly shifting global economic trends and international social media as their exact counterparts in London or Berlin. Yet, despite this digital globalization, they will absolutely, without hesitation, return to their ancestral village for a highly traditional, deeply ritualized family Supra. This remarkable, almost impossible ability to seamlessly and completely blend the ancient historical survival mechanisms with the modern technological world is the absolute key to understanding this nation. They possess a unique capacity to fiercely hold on to a highly distinct, powerful sense of ancient identity while actively embracing the new economic opportunities of the 21st century. However, daily biological and economic life in this ancient, physically beautiful land is absolutely not without its severe, deeply ingrained, and often highly painful challenges. The chaotic, brutal national transition from a controlled Soviet system to a highly competitive, modern global market economy has brought both sudden new opportunities and crushing, widespread financial hardships. Severe economic pressures are a constant, highly stressful daily reality for a massive percentage of local families. There exists a massive, highly visible and constantly widening economic and infrastructure gap between life in the increasingly prosperous, rapidly modernizing capital city and the frequently struggling, slowly decaying rural agricultural regions. High rates of unemployment and chronic underemployment remain deeply persistent, highly corrosive structural issues. This brutal economic reality forcefully drives many desperate individuals to completely abandon their ancestral lands and seek menial manual labor abroad just to send foreign currency back to their starving dependents. The rapid, terrifying depopulation of ancient, historically significant mountain villages is a massive, incredibly serious demographic crisis. As the physically capable youth permanently leave the valleys to desperately seek modern education and stable wage work in the crowded cities, the continuity of traditional ancient ways of life is severely threatened. It leaves behind only a rapidly aging, physically frail population attempting to painfully tend to the massive ancestral lands and maintain the crumbling stone houses alone. Furthermore, Georgia physically exists in a highly complex, historically dangerous, and often deeply volatile geopolitical neighborhood. Its entire national history is defined by a constant, incredibly bloody, and desperate physical struggle for absolute independence from massive, aggressive surrounding empires. The modern nation must continuously and cautiously navigate a highly delicate, incredibly dangerous diplomatic path to secure its fragile sovereignty and build a stable, democratic economic future. The deeply painful, violently unresolved military conflicts over the northern territories of Abkhazia and South Ossetia cast a massive, incredibly long and completely inescapable psychological shadow over the entire population. It is a constant, open wound of profound national pain, a deeply traumatic historical memory, and a terrifying daily reminder of the absolute fragility of physical peace in the Caucasus region. Barbed wire fences and heavily armed military outposts physically divide ancient communities and literally sever the land. Additionally, there is the ever-present, highly complex cultural challenge of violently balancing rapid economic modernization with the desperate preservation of a completely unique, highly fragile cultural heritage. How does a small, vulnerable nation completely open its borders to the lucrative, demanding global world without entirely losing the exact, specific cultural elements that make it completely special? These are not merely abstract, philosophical debates. They are profound, highly urgent questions of literal, cultural, and physical survival that the Georgian people are currently grappling with. So, when faced with such overwhelming geographical, economic, and geopolitical pressures, why do these people stubbornly choose to stay? What is the heavy, unbreakable anchor that firmly holds them to this small, physically dangerous nation, trapped in the Caucasus Mountains? The biological and psychological answer is found not in one single, isolated factor, but in an incredibly powerful, highly complex combination of historical forces. They stubbornly stay for the completely unbreakable, deeply biological bonds of the extended family unit. They rely on a highly complex, deeply ingrained local support system that has historically proven to be vastly more powerful and reliable than any modern government institution. They physically stay for the profound, completely irreplaceable sense of absolute belonging, for the deep psychological comfort of physically living in a specific geographical place where they are deeply known, intimately understood, and highly valued by their immediate community. A place where their own brief, personal biological history is completely, inextricably interwoven with the massive, bloody, and triumphant collective history of the entire nation. Georgia physically exists in a state of highly graceful, incredibly resilient, and constantly shifting balance. It permanently teeters between the heavy weight of an ancient, violent past and the bright, desperate hope of an ambitious future. It is a nation completely shaped by the terrifying, enduring, physical strength of its massive stone mountains and the profound, immeasurable depth of its historical trauma. In a modern, rapidly globalizing world that constantly feels highly disconnected, incredibly rushed, and deeply isolating, this small pocket of land remains a powerful, undeniable physical testament. It stands as a testament to the absolute, enduring survival power of ancient faith, the unbreakable biological bonds of family, and a deep, entirely unshakable human